what is the real significance of Kashi for Hinduism?
Sure. So Kashi is one of the Saptapuri. So in the Puranas, you have this. The Saptapuri are the seven cities capable of bestowing mukti on a person. So the
Yes.
others are Ayodhya, Mathura, Dwaraka, Kanchi, Ujjain, and Haridwar. So that's one significance. And even among the seven cities, these seven cities, Kashi is very special. So Kashi, for example, are about to leave this body, or when our parents leave their body, Kashi is where we go. So in a way, it's the ultimate destination in a physical sense within Bharat for a Hindu. And the reason for that is because Kashi is the city of Jnana, or again, moksha, or liberation. So Kashi itself means to shine. So the light of enlightenment,
Right.
the light
Yeah.
shines. And also, very importantly, it is said, why do people go to Kashi to spend their last days? It is because it is there that Shiva whispers the Taraka mantra into one's ear. So the Taraka mantra is a mantra that helps you cross over from samsara to the beyond. And so it is devoutly believed that at the moment of death, Shiva whispers this into your ear. And from that, Jnana comes. And from that, we attain moksha.
We can start. I think first of all, thank you so much for coming to my podcast. It's indeed a pleasure to have you here. And so all those who are watching this, we are discussing a very important book of our times, which is Kashi, the Valiant History of a Sacred Geography, which is authored by Aditi Banerjee, and we call it a valiant history. Why it is so, which we'll talk about in this session. And this book has come at a very important time when we are having the court case, about the Gyanvapi mosque going on, and we'll be talking about Kashi, which is there, and of course certain aspects related to Hinduism in general. So. Before we start, a very brief introduction of Aditi. So Aditi is a best-selling author based in US. Debut novel, The Curse of Gandhari, was published by Bloomsbury in 2019, which was based on Mahabharat. And Aditi, you may not remember this, but we once met in Delhi at it was either IIC NXC or INTAC. I don't remember because they are close apart. And I got the Gandhari book signed. It was I
Oh,
don't remember when it was. Yeah, but that's when I met you first. She also wrote The Vow of Parvati and Hindu Love Stories, but very importantly, she co-edited Invading the Sacred, an analysis of Hinduism studies in America in collaboration with Rajiv Malhotra ji. She's a devout Hindu and frequently writes about Hinduism and the Hindu American experience. And that is one area, Aditya, where I'd like to talk about the Hindu American experience as well. So, but before we talk about that, about your book, Kashi, the Valiant History. Now, Kashi is not just another city, which we may say that Hindus believe it to be a sacred geography, because a Hindu can see divinity everywhere. It need not be a particular, place or city or a person. Uh, what is the real significance of Kashi for Hinduism?
sure. So Kashi is one of the Saptapuri. So in the Puranas, you have this. The Saptapuri are the seven cities capable of bestowing mukti on a person. So the
Yes.
others are Ayodhya, Mathura, Dwaraka, Kanchi, Ujjain, and Haridwar. So that's one significance. And even among the seven cities, these seven cities, Kashi is very special. So Kashi, for example, are about to leave this body, or when our parents leave their body, Kashi is where we go. So in a way, it's the ultimate destination in a physical sense within Bharat for a Hindu. And the reason for that is because Kashi is the city of Jnana, or again, moksha, or liberation. So Kashi itself means to shine. So the light of enlightenment,
Right.
the light
Yeah.
shines. And also, very importantly, it is said, why do people go to Kashi to spend their last days? It is because it is there that Shiva whispers the Taraka mantra into one's ear. So the Taraka mantra is a mantra that helps you cross over from samsara to the beyond. And so it is devoutly believed that at the moment of death, Shiva whispers this into your ear. And from that, Jnana comes. And from that, we attain moksha. And so that has been the significance of Kashi, that even when the Upanayanam ceremony happens, there's a symbolic journey that the young man takes into Kashi. And so for Hindus, it has always represented the ultimate destination for wisdom, for jnana, for spiritual practices, not just Vedanta, but also Tantra, Yoga,
Yeah.
and Kashi has had this prestige that when the Panditas of Kashi would utter a pronouncement on different questions that would come up about Dharma and the Dharma Shastras, everyone paid a great deal of attention to it because that was the prestige of Kashi. Kashi was where great acharyas would go to have their debates, to meet with each other, to discuss, and from all over Bharat, so including from southern India, eastern India, everywhere. Every community has made their home in Kashi. And so even in the days when there was the pilgrim tax on devotees in Kashi, there's accounts of kings from South India who would pay that on behalf of other people because there was this pan-India, pan-Hindu sense of the unique sacredness of Kashi.
Absolutely. So thanks for introducing us about Kashi and its real significance. So the next question is actually based on this: that why do you think, with so much of significance, it became just another city for Hindus? Okay, there's a temple, there's a Gyanvapi mosque, and there's some dispute going on. Why is it that its significance was not known to Hindus? Why is that only in the past few years, especially since the Ayodhya movement was towards its fag end, and we're talking about Kashi and Mathura. Interestingly, three very important books came out on the last 1 year. One authored by you, of course, one by Dr. Meenakshi Jain, and by Vikram. Why is that this awareness about Kashi? And most importantly, I would say awareness is even more than any dispute or any structure, I think, is the significance of Kashi as the entire city and its significance. Why you think this realization, this understanding about Kashi came so late to Hindus?
Sure. So let me explain what has been happening in the past. And this also goes back to, you mentioned my book about invading the sacred. So there's been a pattern stretching back from colonial times until today to
Yeah,
constantly disparage and denigrate indigenous Indic beliefs and Hinduism. So for example, in 2018, CNN aired this documentary. It was called Believer by Reza Aslan. And this was meant to be a series, and it was actually meant to show different faiths. And ironically enough, it was meant to promote a multicultural understanding and pluralism in the US. The episode that they had on Kashi uh, was so terrible, where they basically wanted to make it very exoticized and
yeah,
sensationalized. So they followed Aghouris who are, handling human feces, things like that. Something very extreme. But
right,
then they're trying to create as though this is what Hinduism is. Here they just
yeah,
dump ashes, things like that. It was a very grotesque depiction. So there was a lot of outrage when this happened, but yet people's brains got kind of colored by this. They got conditioned by this because of these constant attacks. People feel embarrassed of our own heritage and
on
our,
heritage. Right.
a similar thing had happened with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which was a movie made in the
Yeah,
80s, and it showed
yes,
bleeding monkey brains and things like that. Ma Kali demanding human sacrifice, all this kind of thing. So that has colored our own perceptions of our places. So I think people think, oh, this is where our grandparents go. It's superstitious. It's primitive, and so people haven't gone. And so I think a few things have been happening. One is, but I have to say, but Hindus have never stopped fighting. So
right.
even while many of the average Hindus may have forgotten about it, but within Kashi, at Gyanvapi, people have long been for decades and centuries seeking the right of worship in the original sites
Right.
of our devas. So that fight has never stopped. And now that controversy, that litigation isn't recent. It has been stretching back many years, many appeals. A lot of twists and turns in the court system. But then with Ayodhya, it has gotten more momentum. And then I would say in general, there's been an awakening, and this kind of awakening happens. First you got independence for the state, then you got a little bit of
Yeah,
financial. Then you can start thinking about these civilizational matters. So there is this renaissance going on, and that includes a renewed understanding and appreciation for Kashi. Of course, you have like the corridor project, which has its own controversies, which I
yeah,
won't get into. That has also brought along tourism for good and bad. But I think now we're starting to take a look for ourselves with fresh eyes and rediscovering things that have always been there, that we have been kind of alienated through this conditioning that has been happening for so long.
Absolutely. So, coming to this point, so when we say there's a Hindu Renaissance going on, and I think the most important aspect for me is that more Hindus actually become aware of what Hinduism means. I think that's the most important way for me to look at the Hindu Renaissance, because at this stage we actually don't know about our religion, and no matter whenever there is a kind of attack, an intellectual attack on Hinduism, we do take it very seriously. And also this notion that if some professor in the US University or Columbia or somewhere is writing, so it would carry more weightage. Okay, because some Gora is saying so, so it would definitely mean something. At the same time, there is another counter argument which goes, especially in the context of Kashi, that why to look for, as none other than Mohan Bhagwat ji, the Sarsanchalak of RSS, said that why to look for a Shiv Linga in every temple. And there are some who say that, okay, we got Ayodhya, so I think lot has been done for Hindu Renaissance. So why to look after, go after every other temple? So that's another school of thought. We should have more enlightened Hindus rather than, having this temple is ours and that temple is ours. What's your take on that?
Yes. So this is where you had mentioned two other very important books that have come out by Meenakshi Jain and Vikram Sampath on
Yeah.
and those are really important books, and they're much more focused on the specific controversy about
Yes.
the of that dispute. In this book, I wanted to do something a little bit different, which is I really wanted to go into the Stala Purana. So the Stala Purana of Kashi, but also to talk about Stala Purana exactly for this reason, because as you said, we ourselves do not know about our religion. So in one sense, you can say, I went to one Shiva temple. It's like going to all of the Shiva temples. I can go to Kedarnath. Why do I have to go to Kashi? And what people who may not be familiar with Stala Purana is, just like we have the Itihasa, we have the Purana, there's a subset of these Shastras which is called Stala Purana. And that's the Purana of a place. So Purana itself isn't just history, it's also lore. So lore would be the stories of our devas, of rishis who have come. But then the significance of a particular temple. What is the specific, what's the history of the worship that happened there, the austerities and penance that happened there? Because that gives each Shiva Linga, each Tirtha, its own unique character. So you go to one Shiva Linga, it may be capable of bestowing very great siddhis. Another one may help purify your bhakti. So when you go to these places knowing the particular significance of that place, then you're able to attain the benefits and the fruits of it much more quickly. So that's why our rishis and acharyas spend so much time describing these things. So in the Skanda Purana, for example, the Skanda Purana has a lot of Stala Purana about many different places, including the Kashi Khanda. The Kashi Khanda actually tells us about the significance of Vishwanath and Gyanvapi, and also many of us don't even know, but there's Avimukteshwara. So the remaining shards of fragments of the Avimukteshwara Linga are there in the compound between Vishwanath and Gyanvapi today. Once a year on Shivratri, like a few Hindus, at least in the past, were allowed to go and just sprinkle some flowers and water. But in any case, the reason is because what makes a place sacred? What makes a place sacred is there's something unique about the energy, like from a geothermal kind of perspective, or our devas' footprints have been there, or the rishis have gone and done a lot of tapobala there. And that's why when you go, you can feel that. And what we're doing when we go to a temple is we're tapping into that, and then we're bringing some of that back for ourselves. And hopefully we're also contributing a little bit of tapobala to keep the energy going. And so the reason that so much meticulous care was taken throughout the centuries and millennia to preserve sites, and then when they were destroyed, to rebuild them, is because there's this understanding that if you lose that energy, it's not like you can just fungible, you can just now just go to Kedarnath and you'll get the same thing. There's something unique and special about that, and we have to retain that. And so, for example, there's also when you go to these kshetras, and when we talk about sacred geography, we mean kshetras. So it's not just a particular temple or shrine, it's an entire territory. So in Kashi, Vishwanath is the most sacred and powerful linga, perhaps. But there's also something, for example, called the Panchakroshi Yatra. So that's like a yatra of like a 16 kilometer circumference. And among that, there are like maybe 108 places you are to go, and you're to go in a particular sequence. Because when you as a devotee approach that place through that sequence, then you're progressively becoming purified, and you're able to absorb and retain that energy. So, for example, it's a common tradition when you go to Kashi, you go to Dhundi Ganesha and ask for permission and things like that. So that's like one well-known one, but there are many protector deities and others that have to be approached and worshipped. And so what we're really talking about is not just the history of what has happened there, but there's a living energy, tapobala. And tapobala is something, again, we don't understand, but that's actually what sustains
Yes.
Hinduism. So energy, that strength, that power, that Shakti. And when we talk about these sacred places, because each of them has their unique flavor of that Shakti, each one is important. And the other point I would make is when you're talking about a kshetra, let's say one temple has been destroyed. It is not just the loss of that temple, but the entire integrity and strength of the kshetra is weakened. And so it is being revived. So there was a period of time when the Panchakroshi Yatra had been abandoned because it wasn't safe. But when the conditions were ripe again, the panditas of that time meticulously went to redocument and re-establish the yatra again and again.
Right.
It's because of compassion that we should not lose this for the benefit of future generations. And so that is really what we have to pay homage to in understanding the importance of sacred geography and why you can't say we got one and now everything else can be forgotten and tossed
Yes.
aboard.
Right. So that brings up two questions. So the first one would relate to you mentioned the linga. So unfortunately, today the linga is just reduced to a kind of sexual organ. That's how people interpret it. And most importantly, it's the Hindus who think of it just like that. The linga is not just that; it has lot of significance when you talk about Kashi and Shiva, and you have an entire chapter, dedicated to it in the book. So you can tell us what exactly does a linga imply, and what is the significance of having these so many lingas which you talked about in your book?
Sure.
Because that is, I think, a concept very, very misunderstood.
Yes. So originally Linga it's like it's a pillar of light that's Swayambhu, self-manifest.
Yes.
So the story of the primordial Linga is once Brahma and Vishnu were quarreling among themselves about who is supreme. So Shiva sent one of them to find the top of his Linga and one to find the bottom, and neither could. Along the way, Brahma lied and other things happened. But the basic thing is it's an unending pillar of light is a kind of the primordial linga. And then you have some which are Swayambhu lingas, which are self-manifest, and so they're particularly more sacred. So the linga is very interesting because we have this concept of Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. So Nirguna Brahman is Brahman without attributes, so an impersonal manifestation, or not a manifestation, the impersonal one. A Saguna is with attributes, so with qualities, with form. And the unique thing about the Shiva Linga is it's both Nirguna and Saguna, because Nirguna sense it's a very metaphysical, metaphorical, you can say symbolic representation. And then in a Saguna form, you also have the Alankara, you have a concrete physical manifestation, so it has a Saguna form. So that is really like the uniqueness of the Shiva Linga. But basically, when you look upon it, there's all this metaphysical and philosophical significance behind it. So someone who looks at it and thinks of it in a very sexualized form is just really missing out on the whole point. And even if there is an aspect of it that has to do with the cosmic union between, like a linga and yoni, that's also part of existence, part of consciousness. We shouldn't be ashamed of that either.
Very true. So another thing which you mentioned in the book is the concept of sacred geography, and we have the Places of Worship Act 1991, in which we are looking at it from purely a legal perspective. That okay, such structure was there, and then only because Ayodhya dispute was already going on. So how do you see this concept of sacred geography on one hand, and on the other hand, it's the law, because a court would take it from the perspective of, say, what is there in the law books, what is there in the constitution, that okay, this is. How do you see between these two things? One, on one hand, is your religious feelings or religious logic, manifestations, everything, and the other hand, the law of the country, which may have its own flaws, of course. So how do you see these two views which are divergent here?
Yeah. So I have sympathy for the courts because it is a difficult area to go into, and as a
Right.
court, be bound by the laws of the land. But there's something we have to wrestle with, I would say, as a society, which is when we look at this through the prism of history, it becomes something that happened in the past. Okay,
Yeah.
there's a destruction that happened in the 1600s. Why is it an issue now? The reason it's an issue now, the only way you can understand it is through the concept of sacred geography. As a sacred geography, what it means is that the violence of what happened, the injustice of what happened, isn't something that happened hundreds of years ago. It's something that every devotee feels today. You know, when I go to Mathura and I see this mosque towering over this tiny birthplace of Sri Krishna, there's something that I feel and I suffer and is harming me today. And that is my sacred geography, which is this place, which is the Janmastan of my Ishta Devata, for me is Sri Krishna. It's not it cannot properly be celebrated or or visited in a mode of pilgrimage. So there is this harm that is being done today. And what makes it difficult is it's not something like economic or physical. In a way, it's physical, so it's hard to describe. But people have a visceral feeling, and I think for Hindus, what has been hard is it's been hard for us to articulate that feeling. And we're not the only ones who have gone through this. So when Christianity came to the fore, there's a wonderful book by Catherine Nixon on what happened in Europe. So there was the same destruction of temples, defacement.
Yes.
And all of that. So they must have suffered the same thing, but then they were quickly, they were basically forcibly converted, or that sort of has been in the past because no one really practices those religions today. But Hinduism, we're blessed and we're lucky that we still are practicing Hindus today. So this is something that we feel today. And so sacred geography talks about really the importance of places and how they have meaning. And that meaning is spiritual. It's not just historic. It's not
Right.
just civilizational, but it's spiritual and it's psychological, and at the individual and at the collective level that exists. So that's not something unique to Hinduism. So you see this in indigenous traditions all over the world. So the Aborigines have this, the natives have this in the US and in the West. The ancient Greeks and Egyptians had it. So places like Delos and Delphi, they weren't just, people have this idea of like paganism
Yeah.
being just very frivolous,
Yeah.
but those temples were sites of great philosophical discussion, civilization, great devotion. We went to Delos last year, and you can see there was a rebuilt temple for Apollo that was built, and there was like a marble step in front of it, and that had only been there for about 10 years before it was destroyed. But actually, you can see the marble. It was so worn because so many people had come again and again to offer their prostrations. So that's the depth of pilgrimage and the depth of conviction and really devout belief that is there.
Right.
So I really feel, without understanding sacred geography, you can't bring proper weight to these matters about
Right.
why it's so important to Hindus, not just historically, but even today from the perspective of sacred geography and a more religious and metaphysical view.
Right. So talking of this disputed structure as well as Mathura, and about again the understanding which we discussed at the very beginning, that the Hindus themselves don't have understanding of their religion, actually religious practices and a lot of it. Do you see this as a part of, we can say, the overall activism which many times demeans Hinduism? You talked once about Rajiv ji, with whom you worked in Reading the Sacred, actually, and I think it was one of the first books to brought these issues to the fore. Most of the times in academia, we are having such so-called research papers and all, which actually end up, demeaning Hinduism in some way or the other. So we are, I'm getting to know some alternate research going on which says that Swami Vivekananda was a Hindu supremacist. There's an alternate research which says that Gita Press Gorakhpur built the Hindutva fervor, and then Mahabharata was telecast, which brought up the Hindutva fervor and brought the mosque down and all that. So how do you see the impact of such so-called, scholarship and activism on issues which are of importance to Hindu society, the Kashi dispute, the Ayodhya dispute being a part of it?
Yeah. So like I said, I think it's part of our own, awakening. So I went through that myself as a teenager. But if you think about it, what is the other side? The other side would say, if you have this kind of fundamentalism, it will lead to violence. It will lead to disenfranchisement of
Yeah.
Christian Muslim minorities and
Yeah.
things like that. And the thing is that that fear is completely unfounded, because when Hinduism was prevalent in Bharat, you didn't see the types of religious oppression, civil wars, and things like that that
Right.
basically destroyed for so long
True.
before enlightenment and things like that. So pluralism, accepting others, not imposing our beliefs on others, that has never been a problem for us. We kind
Right.
of impose a lens of Western concerns over things that really are not applicable here. So in a very practical sense, you could say, obviously something which results in violence is not to be favored. But
Right.
we have to have like an actual real discussion that doesn't completely block our
Yes.
point of
Yes.
view. And that just starts with, here are these radical Hindus who are being, fanatical and fundamentalist, and now there's going to be a genocide against minorities and things like that. That doesn't help. So to have a serious discussion.
Yes.
So what would the concern be on the other side? The concern on the other side would be that we as Muslims, for example, we also need a mosque to
True. Very true.
practice our.
Very
Absolutely.
true.
I think the only thing is, there are ways to provide for that right to worship, access to
Right.
places of worship and things like that, while still respecting the sacred
Right.
geography of like the kshetra. And as two communities, we should be able to come together and find out a reasonable way to accommodate both. It's actually not that difficult, but it's all of this rhetoric gets in between, and there's this shaming of any Hindu who dares to, present a Hindu point of view, or who dares to want to revive or preserve some element of their faith and religious practices and religious sensibilities. So we have to at least make it a level playing field to have discussion and debate on equal terms. And so
Absolutely.
that's the beginning of things. So without that, you can't have a proper or fair
Of
discussion.
course. Of course. This reminds me of a conversation I had with a journalist, Utpal Kumar, who wrote a book, Reawakening Bharat. And he said that, no Muslim can and should be held responsible for, say, a mosque which was temple which was destroyed 500 years ago. You cannot, call anyone and say, your ancestor destroyed this mosque and all. That's not how we should be approaching this issue. I think a dialogue should definitely be there. Just like a Hindu has the right to, practice his religion, so does a Muslim have, and some alternate solution through a dialogue, as you're mentioning, should be the way forward. But let's hope that that's how this issue should be resolved. We have taken a lot of time to actually resolve the Ayodhya dispute, but let's hope we do resolve these issues as well in a very peaceful manner. That should be the way forward. So one more question, which is about being Hindu in America, and we have such incidents. You wrote this book. We had the episode of Rashmi Sawant, and when she talked about her experience. So you can say it's being a Hindu in America or in any Western country who unfortunately do not understand Hinduism as what it is, and they look at it from the point of an Abrahamic religion, which has different set of norms and practices, and which is absolutely okay, because of course no two religions can have same set of thought process and choices. But how do you see this as being a Hindu in Western world?
Yes, I just want to make one comment on your last point, which is in Ayodhya, right now is being constructed, I think, the largest or one of the largest mosques in the world that will have like the largest Quran So obviously it can be done. You can have quibbles, should it be like right in either, should be the outskirts or whatever, but that's already is being done. So people don't talk about that a lot
Yeah.
right now anyway, that is happening. On your question, so it is very different being Hindu in, I'm going to speak just about America. I think UK has a slightly different dynamics. I've spent a few years in London. The interestingly enough, the issues that that Hindu face here, I think get imported from people who come from India. So like in the universities, you have a lot of leftist scholars who are coming from India, and then they're like stoking these debates about
Yes.
caste, like that, all of that here. So you're kind of importing that social justice activism here. Um, what's interesting about America is there's a lot of what I'd call like freedom here, and there's a lot of like curiosity here. So if you just talk about the American society and American people, in some ways I feel like it's easier being Hindu here than in India, because in India there's so much baggage from the colonial days and so much you have to
Yes.
fight. In the US, people have like just a lot of curiosity, and people are very interested, and it's a place where you carve your own space, you fight for your own things, and then if it's a fair ask, people will give it to you. So for example, when I started wearing a bindi to work, you know, my mother was concerned, what will people say, and things like that. But I found, you know, Americans, just like, you know, whites and things like that, they look like, oh, like, what is that you're wearing? They'd be curious. They'd want to know. It would lead to a good conversation. If I would say I need vegetarian food, I'm not going to drink alcohol, like accommodations are always made and done very respectfully. There's no, you know, shaming or things like this is communal or things like that. So that part of it is very refreshing. What has been difficult is, and it really does start with the universities, which we talked about, invading the sacred, is you have these scholars who are very vested in these ideological battles really about happening in India, and then they're bringing that over here. So for example, caste, it's such a ridiculous situation right now that Hindus born here are having to deal with
Yes.
caste, because I know what caste I was until I was in high school, because it has no relevance to everyday life here.
Yes.
Um, Now you're forcing people to identify with a caste and things like that, which most people here never even think about. And so there's this kind of now we have to fight against that. So
Right.
what really unfortunate is you're hurting people who are already a minority community here, who already face stigma, being, you know, people of color, being a minority, a religious minority. And now you're saying, oh, you also have to overcome, you know, you have to prove that you're not casteist.
Yes. Right.
Now Jews now have to prove that they're not Zionist. Hindus have to
Right.
prove that they're not Hindutvawadis, and you're not casteist, and all of this kind of thing, which basically means just abandon your Hinduness.
Right.
Um, but on the other side, on the other hand, if you see, Muslims have been much more effective in carving out a positive space for them. You won't see a flyer or brochure, or I was watching a movie yesterday, Inside Out 2, and there's always some like a woman wearing a hijab, like a headscarf. It's become very normalized into, well, this is pluralism and things like that. So in a sense, for them, that's a positive representation of their tradition. And they've been able to do that. Before this recent bout of activism for Palestinians, Jews have also been very successful in that. So there's something where Hindus can learn from other communities on how to create a space for them, for ourselves, and how to like effectively lobby and advocate. And I think a lot of times we're on the back foot and we're on the defensive, and there are ways we can do more of that. But that also really starts with Hindus having conviction for themselves and being
Yes.
like confident in themselves and things like that. But I'm heartened to see, I think, more of this space is coming where Hindus can do that. So I have hope for that. But it's something in the US, you can't take it for granted. No one is going to give
Right.
you have to fight for your rights. But if you do fight, it's always a fair fight. So the unfair part is this importation of political battles and things like that from India, which really don't have that much relevance to Hindus here. and this kind of the biases that come from like equality labs and things like that, which have to be countered head on.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
living in America, there's a lot of space to to have to practice our religious traditions in a positive way.
Absolutely. Great. So I have one last question, and all those who are watching, if you have any questions for Aditi, please write in the comment box, and I will take it up with Aditi before we end this session. So, Aditi, in your book, and as we discussed at the beginning about the Hindu Renaissance and all, what does Hindu Renaissance mean to you?
It means to me to be Hindu without apology or without compromise. And so for that, that means that you have to start by looking within. And because there have been so many decades and centuries of being conditioned that our ways are bad, the Western ways is better, and things like that, we haven't been able to decide for ourselves who we are and who we should be. So there are things from like our heritage that maybe are not relevant today and things like that. But you have to figure that out. We have to figure that out for ourselves. So
Yes.
self-determination is not just political, but it's also civilizational, it's also spiritual, it's all these things. And so we have a duty to ourselves and to our ancestors to first understand and know what Sanatana Dharma is, to understand how it could be applied in the modern world, and to find a way of doing it that is for
Yes.
Loka, or really for the great of all, because that's what dharma is. It's not something that's ossified, that because we did something 1,000 years ago, we must do it now. It's a dynamic set of principles that says what is the great for the rhythm, which is the cosmic order for all sentient beings and even non-sentient beings, for the greater good. So it's really
Absolutely.
about sustainability of those things. So we have that duty, and then once we know what that is, we have to, we have to practice it, we have to promote it, we have to transmit it to our children, to other generations, and we have to carve out that space and like the global marketplace of ideas and traditions, to keep that going, and keep the torch that we inherited from our ancestors, keep it for future generations. And so I think that means having a lot of the discussions and debates and churning that we see today. And I think there's a lot of good progress. Like I'm very happy, the fact that 3 books have come out on Kashi from our side.
Yes.
We have publishers willing to publish books by unabashed Hindu
Yes.
people, which when we first published Invading the Sacred, that was very difficult to do. Now there's an audience and a press and publishers we can go to who will do that. So I think on social medias you have voices like Jay Sai Deepak and
Yeah.
Ranganathan, they're in the discourse, and that's really good. So we're able to tell our own history, our own story. So all of that is opening up, but we have to continue fighting for it and working for it, because if we don't, it won't exist for us.
Of course. I remember, as you mentioned, Sai and Dr. Ranganathan, we recently had this launch of Rearming Hinduism by Vamsi Juduriji, and it was at IIC, and I was telling to Dr. Ranganathan that, sir, finally the right wing has conquered IIC, and we are having this Rearming Hinduism book launch right here in the hall of IIC, so that does means a lot. And Sanjeev Sanyal said a similar thing when we had this session of Sword and Sword by Hindol Sen Gupta, which was also coincidentally at IAC. So that the right wing, although ideally one should not equate this with right wing or left wing if it's a matter of civilization. It's a common civilization, common heritage. But as we are labeled the right wingers, so yeah, it was a sort of renaissance for the right wing as well. And yeah, let's hope that we have a very positive, renaissance of Hinduism, which is of course very meaningful. And Aditi, thanks a lot. It was a very enlightening discussion, and I must say you were extremely well prepared for this session. Your answers were indeed very thoughtful. And all those who are watching, this is one book I strongly recommend, because as we discussed, Kashi is not just another city. It has a lot of significance for Hindus, for India. Anyone who's interested in the past as well as future of Hinduism and India must go through this book. So Aditi, thanks a lot. Only one thing is left. Whenever you come next time to India, I have to get this book signed. So whenever you have plans, I would definitely like to meet and get this book signed. But Thank you so much for your time, Aditi. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for having me, and a wonderful discussion.
Thanks, Aditi. Thank you everyone, those who have joined. And yeah, I'll put this video on after some days on YouTube as well. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Aditi. Thank you. Bye bye.